Okay, good evening, everybody who's present here and everybody who's joining us online. Welcome to Outlandish Talmud Stories and Outstanding Life Lessons, Class 37. Tonight's class is titled The Rise and Fall of General Bar-Kochba. We are dedicating tonight's learning to honor those who fell, the fallen soldiers of the IDF during the wars of Israel, since its establishment as a state in 1948, and of all those who lost their lives in acts of terror. And we're talking about thousands of people who have given up their lives as a Kiddush Hashem in protection of the Jewish people, in protection of the Jewish state, in protection of Jewish people all over the world, in protection of all decent people, all democracies around the world. These are our heroes. And we think about them tonight and tomorrow, Yom HaZikaron, and we thank them for making the ultimate sacrifice. And we extend to their families our blessings for strength and for God's comfort. And may they know of no more pain and no more sorrow. And may Hashem protect our current soldiers in the IDF, protect their lives. There should be no more wars. May we merit the ultimate redemption and the time of peace, where there'll be, as the Talmud teaches us, no more war, no more jealousy, no more hatred, no more pain, no more hunger, no more illness, no more disease. May that time happen very soon. We're going to light a candle in memory of the thousands of souls that we are memorializing tonight. So here is the candle, and we'll take a moment just to make a prayer, a silent prayer. May God bring them comfort, and may to their souls, may the souls have an aliyah in heaven. Okay, so if you want to dedicate tonight's class or any class, there's a link in the video description, which you can press, and that'll help us continue doing what we're doing. Also, the link for the source sheet for tonight's class is in the video description. Download it. I want you to follow along. I've been quite ambitious. We have a number of sources tonight, simply because there's no real one place in the Talmud dedicated to talking about the topic of tonight, but there are some various teachings, whether it's the Jerusalem Talmud or the Babylonian Talmud or Midrashic teachings. So I've gathered a number of teachings to try to paint the picture as comprehensively as possible so we can understand about the rise and the fall of General Bar-Kochba. Who was General Bar-Kochba? This takes us back to a complicated, difficult time in history, in Jewish history. And tonight we're going to be studying a lot of history, an important Jewish history, as well as exploring the life of a complicated person, a controversial person, who we're calling Bar-Kochba, even though that was not his real name. And the truth is, for a very long time, maybe up until quite recently, we never even knew his real name. But we now know that his real name is Shimon. We know that because we've found archaeological findings and coins and letters of his where he has signed his name as Shimon. And he signed his name as Shimon and more than that, but we'll discuss that when we're ready for that. But we know him as Bar-Kochba, or we're going to find out in the Talmud actually has a different name for him, which perhaps more was his real name. And the question is, what's that name and what's this name and why is it given different names? And it's part of the story that I want to tell you tonight. So some background to understand this person, Bar-Kochba, and the time. We're talking in Jewish history around the year in the 130s after the Common Era. In fact, the Bar-Kochba revolt, which was the third revolt against the Romans, the third famous Jewish revolt against the Romans, was the year 132 to 135 after the Common Era. I say the third because there was a second and there was a first. And it's important you understand a little bit about that so you know the history and the context, what happened in the year 130s after the Common Era. The first revolt, or the first war, you probably know about, because that was the famous war where the Romans ultimately destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the Second Temple, destroyed the Jewish Commonwealth, killed millions of lives, exiled, imprisoned millions of people, and it was a total destruction for the Jewish state and the Jewish people. This is around the year 70 after the Common Era. It didn't happen in one day. There's a period of 5-10 years of many wars that are happening from the early 60s after the Common Era, where different Jewish strongholds and villages and rogue armies are trying to fend off the Romans who are trying to expand their power, and they're eyeing over Israel and Jerusalem because that's going to be a big prize winner for them. And after many difficult battles and many Jewish lives were lost, around the year 70 or 71 after the Common Era is when the ultimate destruction of the temple happens. And as I mentioned, there's millions of people who were killed and millions who were enslaved and exiled, but there were still some communities, some Jewish people who still lived in Israel. The Romans took charge. They were the governing entity over the state of Israel. But there were, as the Talmud describes, there were actually a number of communities that were spared, and the Jews were given a chance to build and rebuild some Jewish life in Yavna, in cities in the north, and other places where they could rebuild some of their schools and continue some Torah learning at that time. So even though the Romans took over, what they were demanding, or their persecution afterwards of the Jewish people, was limited, and there was some life, some freedom of life to the Jewish people. However, life was still not easy, and the memory of destruction was not easy, and the Romans levied heavy taxes on the Jewish people, and there were some decrees which made life difficult for the Jewish people. So that leads to the background to the second revolt of the Jews against the Romans. And this happens around the year 115 after the Common Era. So this is about 45 years or so after the destruction of the temple. Now, this rebellion is famously known as the Kittos War. I'll soon tell you why the Kittos War, or as in Hebrew, the Merd Hatfutzot, which is the rebellion of the diaspora. Now, at this time, who was the Roman emperor? His name is Trajan, or in the Gemara's language, his name is Trajanos. And Trajan took over from Severus, who took over from Domitian. Now, Trajan originally was not the worst of emperors against the Jewish people. However, the general Roman rule was making life very difficult for the Jewish people. And something was brewing. There were communities, there were Jews who were training some kind of guerrilla warfare, amassing weapons, making plans, because there was a plan to say, it's been 45 years in exile. Now remember, when Babylonians destroyed the first temple, there was a prophecy that in 7 years' time, we're going to be able to go back to Israel and rebuild the second temple. So now the Jews are thinking after the destruction of the second temple, well, maybe there's a chance that we'll be able to once again live peacefully back in the land of Israel and rebuild the third temple. That was the plan. There's no plan, as we know it now, to be in exile and to be in a state of destruction for 2,000 years. That wasn't the plan. The plan was we're going to rebuild. When was the right time, and how's it going to happen? So some people felt, let's negotiate. Let's deal with diplomacy against the Romans. Others said, no, we have to fight. If we're not going to fight, it's never going to happen. So this is around the year 115. This is a time when General Trajan is concentrating most of his forces and armies on the eastern side of the Roman Empire. And therefore, there was a lack, a void of some Roman legions and soldiers in areas of Jewish communities, such as in Cyprus and Greece and Egypt. And it's these Jews who decide that we're going to make a revolt, we're going to fight and win, hopefully, and then be able to move back to Israel, reclaim the land, and rebuild the temple. And so, in fact, the Jews started a revolt. Now, Trajan, the emperor, is caught off guard completely. He wasn't expecting this. He did not have the manpower there needed to control this revolt. And so he quickly sends a general, and the general's name is, I have it written down because I can't remember all the details. The general's name is Julius Quintus, if that's how you pronounce it. Lulius Quintus in Roman. Now, Quintus, that's why the war became known as the Kittos War. It was taken from his name, Quintus. And he is the general sent to completely destroy and fight back against the Jewish revolt. There was initially some Roman loss. However, the Romans eventually did win and destroyed those communities entirely. Now, the story I'm telling you right now does not get mentioned in the Talmud. We don't have it in sources of Jewish history. in traditional sources. However, there is another story in the Talmud, which I believe is connected to this story, because after Quintus and his armies managed to destroy this revolt of the Jewish people and kill so many, they move on to Judea, to Israel, and they continue that battle. And they continue to bring aggression and destruction into Judea, into Israel as well. Now, that leads to the story that the Talmud brings. The Talmud brings a story that happened probably in the city of Lud, or there's a city of Lud in Israel today. It might not be the exact location where that Lud is, or the Talmud calls it Ludkia. Now, in the city of Lud, you had a lot of big Jewish community, and you had two people who were not necessarily known to be two of the greatest Jewish people, but their names, they had Roman names, and the names were Pappus and Lulinus. Now, the story goes like this. Apparently, the daughter of Trinus, the princess, was found dead. Trinus wanted to blame, the Trajan wanted to blame the Jewish people. And so he said he's going to destroy collectively the entire city of Lud and all the neighboring cities as a punishment for the death of his daughter, which he blamed that they did it. Unless someone's going to own up who really did it. Now, it wasn't the Jewish people at all. However, to spare the lives of everybody in Lud, men, women, and children, these two people, Pappus and Lulinus, they stood up and they said it was us. It wasn't, but they said we're going to give our lives away to spare the rest of the people. That's how they were killed. Well, that's one version of how they were killed. There's another version that says that they had a chance to spare, to save their life, if they would drink from a cup, and on the cup was a picture of an idol, so drinking from that would be a form of worshiping that idol, but they refused that option. We're going to worship an idol at the expense of their life. We're not allowed to do that, in fact, according to Jewish law. And so instead, their lives were not spared, and they ended up being killed. This apparently happens as a consequence of the battle of the Kittos War, which was the revolt of the Jewish people earlier in Egypt and other places. Now, just something you should know about the greatness of Pappus and Lulinus. So the Talmud records that two amazing stories. One amazing story is that Rabbi Yeshua, the son of Levi, once had like a near-death experience. His soul almost went to heaven, and then he came back down. And they asked him, when you were there, what did you hear and what did you see? He said, I saw Olam Haba. I saw the world to come. I saw what's happening in heaven. And one of the things that we heard being said there, it was said, Harugei Malchus, those two people, Pappus and Lulinus, who were killed by the Roman emperor because they confessed, even though they didn't do it, to save the entire city of Lud. So the heavenly voice said, Ein kol berga yochel lama b'mchitzasa, no creature, no creation, no person can stand anywhere near their location in heaven. They have the highest of locations in heaven. They sacrificed their lives, Kiddush Hashem, to save so many people. And that was the verdict, the righteousness of these two people. That's one episode. Another episode that we're told is that a Rabbi Alexandri once appeared in a dream to Rabbi Acha, who was trying to see him in a dream for a very long time. And he asked him, what's going on over there in Olam Haba in heaven? And he told him, I've heard it said there, Harugei Lud ein lifnim mimechitzatam. Those who were killed on account of the massacre of the accusation in Lud, the libel, in other words, Pappus and Lulinus, there is nobody closer to God than them. So that's the story of Pappus and Lulinus, which is super interesting. Now, that summarizes, that concludes the episodes of the second revolt in the year 115 of the Jews against the Romans. For the next 10, 15 years, you can imagine the Jews are once again getting agitated. Now, not all of them. Some of them have given up. Some of them have said, that's it. The Romans are too powerful for us. It's impossible, as we have seen, to win against the Romans. And so we're going to retreat. We're going to acquiesce. It's not the time. Whenever God will decide is the time, then it'll be the time. Now let's just behave, be quiet, get along, try to be peaceful, and work things out and plan life differently. Which, as we've spoken about many, many times, this was a real transition of the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, from temple times to post-temple times. And a lot of the rabbinic tradition, and a lot of the new mitzvot and the new ways to celebrate Shabbat and festivals and all kinds of laws have to be reenacted by the rabbis now, because now it's Jewish life without a temple. So it's a very exciting time, unfortunately, due to the circumstances. Now, this sets the stage for our story for tonight, which is the third revolt, and that is the Bar-Kochba revolt. Now, some background here. You should know that by this time, Trajan has passed away. Trajan passed away soon after the Kitos War, I think in the year 117. He was sick. Apparently, he traveled on a boat. He was going to Greece. He had some kind of heart attack or whatever it was, and he died. Now, his successor was a very cruel emperor whose name was Hadrian, or in the Talmud, Adrianus. Now, maybe it's told that Trajan actually sort of adopted him as his son before he passed away. He wanted him to take him over. He found confidence in him, or maybe not. Maybe it was the wife. Somehow, he wasn't a really biological descendant, but Hadrian takes over as the emperor. Now, Hadrian is doing what the Romans do when they're trying to expand their empire and trying to conquer as many lands as they can, but he has his eyes on Israel and his eyes on Jerusalem. He actually makes a visit to Jerusalem in the year 130. And when he comes to Jerusalem in the year 130, he comes like a man of peace. Now, there was some confidence that the Jewish people had in Hadrian earlier, because when Hadrian became the emperor, he did say that he's going to give permission for the Jews to return to Israel and rebuild the third temple. Now, he's not the first that has said that. Other emperors said that also. They say that, like politicians who say something to get voted, and then, of course, it never happens. Well, Hadrian did originally promise that, so the Jews thought maybe he will. And when he's arriving in Israel, Jerusalem, in the year 130, they're thinking maybe he's coming now to help us or give us the permission to rebuild the third temple. However, when Hadrian arrives, the Jews realize this is not the case at all. What does Hadrian do? So Hadrian orders that a altar, a mizbeach, should be built on the Temple Mount, and they're going to erect an idol, the god of Jupiter, and they're going to start to offer sacrifices to the god of Jupiter. So the Jews see right away this is not the person who has plans to let the Jews worship there in their temple, but rather he's offering sacrifices to the god Jupiter. In addition, Hadrian starts to develop a rebuilding and a renaming of the entire Jerusalem. No longer is going to be Jerusalem, because he wants to actually eradicate the memory of Jerusalem, and he starts to plan the building of what's known as Aelia Capitolina. Aelia Capitolina was going to be the Roman name to the new Roman city that's going to be built on the ruins of the Jewish Jerusalem. So now the Jews see what they're dealing with over here. Also, Hadrian starts to come out with a number of decrees against Jewish life and the Jewish people. So famously, we know that he forbade Shabbat. Shabbat's not allowed anymore. He forbade festivals. No allowed to celebrate festivals anymore. He forbade Brit Milah. No more circumcisions for babies anymore. So we see right away the Jews saw what his intentions were, and he's not willing to cooperate. Now, he wanted to pretend that he was, so he actually he minted a coin during his time there in Jerusalem in the year 130, and on the coin, I was going to pull up a picture, but you can find it. One side is a picture of him, and the other side is a picture of him or somebody offering this sacrifice on the altar to Jupiter, and next to him is a woman, and next to the woman is young children, and the woman's supposed to represent the Jewish people, and they're there, hands out in an expression of peace, and the young children are giving grapes to the woman and to him, and he was trying to send a message to the Jewish people: me and you, we can get along, we can be peaceful, just follow my word, I'm going to do things my way, and if you follow along, we will be peaceful. But for many Jews, that wasn't an option, because what's the point? There's no, it's either our Jewish life or nothing. There's no such thing as abandoning Shabbat and abandoning mitzvot. What are we going to live for? To live in the Roman Aelia Capitolina? That's not Jewish life. So Jews are getting frustrated over here. One of them, who we know little about as up until before this time, but one of them is a very strong, a very charismatic a very dynamic and exciting person, built a mighty person. His name is Shimon Bar-Kochba, Shimon the son of Kochba. And this is our topic for tonight. Now, why is he called the son of Kochba? There's a number of explanations. Some want to say that he came from the town of Kaziv, so it's Shimon from Kaziv, or maybe that was the name of his mother, or maybe that was the name of his father. It's not clear what the name Kochba comes from. There's one commentary, a historical commentator, who says that it comes from a similar expression that describes a bunch of dates. And apparently, if you look at the way the dates are formed on the palm tree, that kind of look with, I don't know, bulges of dates sticking around that reminded everybody of this person's appearance. He was muscular, he was well-toned, he was mighty, he was fierce, and that was a way that they described him. So this is Shimon ben Kochba. In fact, later, when he emerges as a general, we're going to discuss now, we found letters a number of decades ago from him in archaeological finds and some coins. And he also minted coins during his revolt. And it's interesting what he minted in his coins. So on one side, I have the pictures in front of me. On one side, he has a picture of the temple, because he clearly was standing up as a general and saying, I am going to save the Jewish people. We're going to defeat the Romans, and we're going to return back to Jerusalem, rebuild the temple. So he has on one side the temple. On another side, he put on various mitzvot. For example, in one of them is a lulav and etrog, like from Sukkot, or there's a harp, or there's other items of mitzvot. And he writes there, and every coin has a year from, so he writes there, year one of redemption. He was so confident that he's going to bring redemption. So this coin that he minted is year one of redemption. And many of his coins or his letters are signed Shimon ben Kochba, Hanasi al Yisrael. Shimon, the son of Kochba, the prince, the leader of the Jewish people. He called himself the leader of the Jewish people. We're gonna see, however, it wasn't just him who called himself, but there were others, especially great rabbis, who recognized him as the leader of the Jewish people. One of them being, and we're going to get into text number 1 now, the great Rabbi Akiva. Now, as it happened at any precarious moment in Jewish history, as it happened when the temple was being destroyed, as it happened later, there's always been a tension in the Jewish community about how to confront the enemy. Maybe today, it's the same tension. Do we fight? Are we aggressive? Do we say we're going to, or do we act more passively in a more peaceful way? They're the ruler right now. They're the superpower. Let's just play along, get along, and find the right time with diplomacy to get our way. And there's always been the pacifists versus the aggressors. Well, clearly, Shimon, the son of Kochba, said, now's the time to fight. If not now, when? We're the Jewish people. We have to come together, create an army, and finally push back against the Romans, destroy them, and bring redemption. Because now we're talking 60 years, in the year 130, 60 years after the destruction of the temple. And they're thinking about this, possibly a 70-year prophecy, where it's time to, like it was during the exile of Persia, after the destruction of the first temple, time to go back. So it seems like in the next few years, it's time to go back. How's it going to happen? We're not going to wait for God's miracles. We're going to make it happen. We're going to fight them. We're going to defeat them. Okay. Now let's go to text 1. Text 1 is from the Jerusalem Talmud, Tractate Tainit, chapter 4, passage 5. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai once taught, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is a very famous one, we've spoken about him many times, and we're soon coming up to his great holiday because he passed on Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, which is going to be in a couple weeks' time. He was one of the great students of Rabbi Akiva. He once said that my master, Rabbi Akiva, expounded on the verse the Torah says in the book of Balak, which is the prophecies of Bilam. Bilam tried to curse the Jewish people, but instead he gave unbelievable blessings and prophecies. So he said, I see it, but not now. I behold it, but not soon. A star, a kochav, has gone forth, or will go forth from Jacob, and a staff will arise from Israel, which will crush the princes of Moab and uproot all the sons of Shem. Now this was, according to the Talmud, a prophecy about the coming of Mashiach. The star will arise, the staff will arise, and destroy the enemies and bring redemption back to the Jewish people. When Rabbi Akiva would see Bar-Kochba, he would say, this is the King Mashiach. This general who was ready to step up and show such a level of sacrifice. And he was mighty and he was powerful. And he could rally people together and excite. And we're going to soon discover how many people actually joined his army. Lots of people. He was a very powerful person. And so when the verse says the star has gone forth or will go forth from Jacob, this Kochav, Rabbi Akiva said it's him. He's the star. God is answering our prayers. He is our Mashiach. Let's back him. Let's support him. And let's follow him. Let's fight his wars. He is going to win the wars for us and free us from the Romans and bring us the redemptions. It's at this point that his name changes, because his name was Bar-Kochba or Bar-Kochba, as we mentioned earlier. But now Rabbi Akiva is calling him the Kochav, the star. So no longer is he just Bar-Kochba, but now he's Bar-Kochba. Bar-Kochba probably comes from the way Rabbi Akiva called him the star. Now, it wasn't just Rabbi Akiva, but it was probably many other great rabbis and sages as well who also backed Bar-Kochba, wanted to support him. And so, I don't know if they saw him as the Mashiach, but they saw him as a valid general and he's fighting the good fight. Rabbi Akiva called him the Mashiach. Rabbi Yochanan ben Turta responded, and we're not so clear who this Rabbi Yochanan ben Turta is. We don't really have any other mentioning of him. So it's one person who responded, Akiva, grass will grow on your cheek, and Messiah will still not have a right. It's like today we say, grass will grow on my palm. You're making a big mistake. Bar-Kochba is not the Mashiach. This is not a good fight. It's not a fight we should fight. It's impossible to win. The Romans are much more powerful than us. The Romans have hundreds of thousands of people in their army. They have high-level, sophisticated artillery. We're just going to get butchered. We're going to get decimated. Let's not do this. Now's not the time. Let it go. And he's not the Mashiach. Let's talk about his army now. Rabbi Yochanan taught. There were 80,000 Roman soldiers who besieged Beitar. Okay, so the battle of Bar-Kochba leads to a battle that is mentioned in the Talmud called the Battle of Beitar. And we're going to learn about the Battle of Beitar more in source number 3. There it's mentioned more explicitly. Beitar may have been the stronghold or the headquarters of where Bar-Kochba operated from. So we'll learn about that in a moment. But it says there the city was defended by Bar-Kochba, who had 200,000 soldiers with severed fingers. They each were missing a finger. Why were they missing a finger? Because Bar-Kochba said as follows: who wants to join my army? To join my army, you have to be a very strong person. You have to be a fearless person, a fierce person. The test, if you're ready to join my army, is come here, take this knife, take this axe, and cut off your finger. You can do that, you're in. If not, we don't need you. So 200,000 people, a lot of people, cut off their finger to be part of Bar-Kochba's army. Now the sages came to Bar-Kochba once and they said, how long will you continue to make cripples of Israel? That's not a way to test a person. First of all, it's against Jewish law. You're not allowed to maim yourself. You're not allowed to cut. You're not allowed to destroy your body at all. Why would you do that? And then you're crippling them, and now they're probably weaker now. They can't hold the spear. They can't hold the sword as well. They're missing a finger. So he tells them, all right, I understand you, fair point, but how else should I test them? I need to know that they're really strong, that they're real warriors, that they're the people I can count on to defeat these Romans. So they answered, we have another idea for you. Anyone who is incapable of uprooting a cedar of Lebanon while riding by on his horse should not be counted among your troops. You want to know how to test them? Put them on a horse, make them ride past a cedar tree. Now, a cedar tree is tall, is thick, has deep roots in the ground. It's a very strong tree. As they're riding by, they have to be able to wrap their hand around this tree, and with the force of their might and with the speed of the horse, they have to be able to uproot that tree. I don't know what's harder, that or cutting off your finger. Cutting off your finger, anybody can do, right? I would imagine it's harder. Well, you know how many people did it? So the Gemara says, Bar-Kochba had 200,000 soldiers who knew how to uproot the tree, and 200,000 soldiers who had cut off their finger. So now he's built an army of 400,000 soldiers. A huge army. An army that could indeed match the Roman army. Now here I want to tell you something interesting. Another thing that we are commemorating during this time of year, the time of the Omer, is the death of 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. Why did 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva pass away? So if you study the Talmud says a simple reason. There was a plague, and the plague killed them. And why did they have a plague? The Talmud says because they didn't know how to respect each other, so maybe it was some form of punishment from God. But a plague killed 24,000 students, and only very few remained, one of them being Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who we just mentioned about him. But there are other opinions. There's a famous opinion from Rabbi Shura Gaon, who says, actually, these 24,000 students became apostates. Something happened to them, a plague of their mind, a plague of their souls. Something happened, and I mean, it's not something happened. The context here is there's this still memory of the destruction of the Jewish people. There's still such a difficult time of persecution under the Romans. Life is not easy. So they gave up on their faith. 24,000 students. That's a second opinion. And then there's another opinion. There are those that say that these 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva actually joined Bar-Kochba's army. Because their own Rebbe, Rabbi Akiva, is supporting Bar-Kochba, and he's pronouncing that he is the Mashiach, and everyone get behind him. If you want to be on the right side of history, you got to be on his side. So they all joined his army. So out of the 400,000, 24,000 of them are Rabbi Akiva students. And they pass away because, as we're going to find out, in the end, Bar-Kochba's plan does not work, and he gets completely obliterated by the Romans. Let's get back to the text. Here are two interesting anecdotes that also give some context of Bar-Kochba. Once, when Bar-Kochba's forces were going out to battle, an elderly man came and said, "May your God give you assistance." He gave him a blessing before war. He misspoke. Bar-Kochba misspoke and replied, "Let him not assist us nor hinder us." We don't want God's assistance. We're just asking God not to get in the way. We, on our own, with our own strength, our own training, our own courage, we can defeat the Romans on our own, which was really not a nice thing to say. And that didn't reflect well on Bar-Kochba. And that didn't give more confidence to those people who didn't have any confidence in him. What do you mean we don't need God? Jewish people live, God is the source of everything. Even our physical strength, our physical might, our army, our IDF today, and we have to fight. We have to fight the physical war because that's what happens in this world. But our blessing and our strength comes ultimately from God. It's a connection with Hashem. And yet he dismisses God and tells God to keep at it. You want to know how strong he was? What was an example of Bar-Kochba's great strength? He would block the catapult stones with his knee and hurl them back, killing many soldiers. This, you can imagine the kind of guy we're dealing with over here. All right. Now, let's learn about the Battle of Beitar. So the final battle of Bar-Kochba is in Beitar. And you may know the story because on Tisha B'Av, one of the things that we're memorializing on Tisha B'Av is the destruction in Beitar. So the temple was destroyed, both temples were destroyed on Tisha B'Av, but also the ultimate destruction in the final war and the loss of Beitar happened on Tisha B'Av as well. How does the Gemara say the story? So look at source number 3 in the Talmud, from Talmud Gittin 57a. Source 3. The Talmud says, the city of Beitar was destroyed on account of a shaft from a carriage. What's the story? It was customary in Beitar that when a boy was born, they would plant a cedar tree. And when a girl was born, they would plant a cypress. A beautiful custom. Plant trees for every child that's born. And when they would later marry each other, each boy and girl found their tree, cut down their tree, and they would construct the chuppah canopy for them out of the wood of that tree. A very beautiful custom. One day, the emperor's daughter passed by there, and the shaft of the carriage in which she was riding broke. They needed a plank of wood to fix the carriage. Her attendants chopped down a cedar from among those trees and brought it to her. Now, those trees we don't touch. They belong to a boy, to a girl, and they're going to get used for their chuppah. And now the Romans have chopped down this tree. So the residents of Beitar did not act very responsibly. Because if the Romans cut down a tree, as sad as you are and as pained as you are, they're the Romans, they're the soldiers, they're armed, they're the superpower. We're just residents of Beitar. You just keep it quiet and swallow it. But they didn't do that. They came and they fell upon them and they started to beat them. So now these soldiers came running back to the emperor and they said, the Jews have rebelled against you. So the emperor said, fine, time to engage in war against Beitar. So this all tied together. The emperor has now decided to fight war against Beitar, and who is fighting for Beitar to defend the Jewish people is Bar-Kochba and his army. Rabbi Zera says, the Rabbi Abo says, the Rabbi Yochanan says, these are the 80,000 officers of the Romans with battle trumpets in their hands, who entered the city of Beitar when the enemy took it and killed men, women, and children until their blood flowed into the great sea. There was a river of blood from Beitar into the great sea. Lest you say that the city was close to the sea, you should know that it was 1 mile away, a couple kilometers away. That's how many people were murdered. A little more gruesome description. It is similarly taught in the Brisa that Rabbi Eliezer the Great says, there are 2 rivers in the Adayim Valley in that region, one flowing one way and one flowing the other way. And the sages estimated that in the aftermath of this war, these rivers were filled with 2 parts water and 1 part blood. 1/3 of those rivers was blood. Likewise, it was taught in a Braita. For 7 years, the Gentiles harvested their vineyards that had been soaked with the blood of Israel without requiring any additional fertilizer. For 7 years, they fertilized their fields with this blood. So Bar-Kochba had big dreams for the Jewish people, and he has put together an army of 400,000 people. Now, we have sources that tell us that his soldiers were not just Jewish people. Jewish people joined his army, but also Samaritans and other non-Jews, and even some Romans joined his army. Because besides the Jews being very disappointed at the Romans, there were many who were disappointed with the Romans, many who didn't enjoy what they were doing after taking over civilization. And so there was a concerted effort, not just from Jews, but from many people came together to join the army and defeat the Romans, which they tried. And Rabbi Kiva thought he's going to be the Mashiach. And he thought this is going to be the end. We're going to win. But they didn't win. Bar-Kochba was not the right person. He wasn't the general. He wasn't the Mashiach that we thought he was. And they lost the battle. Now, it's just getting exciting. Here is some information that we have from history about the extent of the loss and the destruction after Beitar fell. It says the Bar-Kochba revolt resulted in the extensive depopulation of Judean communities, more so than during the first Jewish-Roman War of the year 70 after the Common Era. Meaning, as bad as the first revolt and the first destruction, and the destruction of the temple was, and the amount of lives that were killed, at least there was still some presence of Jewish life and Jewish community in Israel. And then there was the second revolt. Lud was destroyed, others were destroyed, but there was still some presence. Bar-Kochba said, I'm going to bring and restore back the Jewish people back to Israel. Actually, after Bar-Kochba has been destroyed together with Beitar, now there's almost nothing left of Jewish life in Israel. According to historians, 580,000 Jews perished in that war, and many more died of hunger and disease. Many Jews were taken as war captives and taken into slavery. Those who survived were sold on the Roman slave market. In fact, there were so many that there was like inflation of Jewish slaves, so the price of a Jewish slave dropped to the price of a horse. Apparently, about 900 villages were destroyed. So you have to think a little bit about, remember, there were many who opposed Bar-Kochba's war and said, you're just going to make things worse, not better. And many who supported him. But now think about what did happen. After he claimed to be the Mashiach, or they claimed him to be the Mashiach. He claimed to be the general who's going to bring redemption. And what happened afterwards? And what were we left with? Much less than what we had even before, even after previous destructions. I want to go to source number 2, which has, it's not from the Talmud, it's from some other sources, midrashic sources, and it has some additional and other information about this revolt and about the ultimate downfall of the Jewish people in Beitar. So the Medrash teaches, for 3.5 years, Hadrian Caesar besieged Beitar. So Beitar wasn't just tomorrow morning we're going to destroy Beitar, but it was an ongoing effort. They already besieged Beitar for 3.5 years. One of the great Jewish sages who lived there was Rabbi Eliezer Hamudai, and every day of those 3.5 years, now they were painful time because they were stopping the flow of food and the flow of water and the flow of medical supplies. It was a siege, and a siege, what happens inside there is people go hungry and illness starts to spread, and it's really, really difficult. One person, Rabbi Elazar, every day he wore sackcloth and he fasted and he prayed to God, Master of the world, do not sit in judgment today. Please don't destroy us today. And every day he prayed that way. And apparently, as we're soon going to find out, every day that he prayed, God could not destroy them. It was his prayers that were saving the Jewish community of Beitar. Now, Hadrian decided to return. Right, this siege is going on for 3.5 years. They're not able to pull it off. They're not able to destroy Beitar. So Hadrian, the emperor, says, I'm going to go and check out what's going on. Time to bring an end to Beitar. All of a sudden, a Cushite, a Kuthite, one of the arch enemies of the Jews, came to him and he said, Master, as long as this rooster, that's how they called Rabbi Elazar, sits there in ashes and prays to God, you're never going to be able to conquer it. If he's there and he's praying, you're not going to have any luck because his prayers to God are much stronger than your entire army. So this Kuthite says, wait for me, I'll enable you to capture it today. Let me take care of Rabbi Elazar, and once he's out of the picture, we'll be able to successfully destroy them. So he goes to Beitar, and he goes to the main gate, and he finds Rabbi Elazar, who was busy praying. So he made believe he was whispering in his ear. Now, he's setting up something over here. This enemy is coming now into the city and whispering as if he's close with Rabbi Elazar. That raises a lot of suspicions. What's going on over here? Whose side is who on? That guy is not on our side, so which side is Rabbi Elazar on? What's happening over here? So people who were very suspicious went to Bar-Kochba, the general, Bar-Kochba, and they told him, your uncle, Rabbi Elazar, seeks to deliver the country into the hands of Hadrian. He must be passing on secrets. That guy must be a spy. What else do they have to talk about? Bar-Kochba got worried. One of his own people, Rabbi Elazar, is the one that's passing on secrets to Hadrian the emperor. So Bar-Kochba sent a message to bring this Kuthite before him. And he challenged him. What did you say to Rabbi Elazar? And what did he answer you? Tell me what's going on over here. The Kuthite replied, if I tell you what I told him, King Hadrian will kill me. If I don't tell you what I told him, you're going to kill me. I'm going to get killed either way. Better I allow myself to be killed by you than to reveal the secrets of the king. Now, this whole thing was a setup because he never has communicated anything to Rabbi Elazar. But he's playing the game over here and he's raising their suspicions. So Bar-Kochba assumed that Rabbi Elazar sought to deliver the country to the hands of Hadrian. Now, just to explain this, Bar-Kochba, like any great leader in that kind of situation, starts to get very paranoid. Because you know that the only chance of possibly succeeding is if everybody around you was 100% committed to you and your cause. And when the going gets tough, some people have second thoughts. Some people reconsider. And if someone reconsiders and sees that the winner might be the other side, and there's even an option of maybe trying to save your life, save your skin, and to start to work for the other side, you've got a big problem. So Bar-Kochba is extremely paranoid that there's somebody here in Beitar, one of the Jewish people, one of his armies, who is communicating and passing on secrets to Hadrian. And now he's assuming that he has this suspicious story where this Kuthite is whispering in the ear of Rabbi Elazar. Now he thinks it's his own uncle. So now he calls over his uncle, Rabbi Elazar, and he asks him, what did the Kuthite say to you? Elazar responded, I have no idea what he whispered to me. Why? I was in the middle of praying. Remember, it's my prayers that save you every single day. I didn't hear anything. And what'd you say to him? I said nothing. I don't even know who he is. He was telling the truth. Bar-Kochba was not convinced. He became very angry and he kicked him, causing him to die. He kills his uncle, Rabbi Elazar, the greatest sage in Beitar, or one of the greatest sages alive during that time, the person whose prayers were holding it all together, saving the Jewish people, and now Bar-Kochba has killed him. A voice was then heard from heaven, and the voice said, woe to the shepherd of the idol, who has abandoned the flock, a sword on his forearm and on his right eye. The quote from Zechariah. You have broken the forearm of Israel and blinded her right eye. You've killed the great Rabbi Elazar. Therefore, the forearm of this man, Bar-Kochba, shall wither and his right eye shall be struck. In other words, the Jews' own sins thus brought it about that Beitar was captured and Bar-Kochba was put to death. It sounds like Bar-Kochba could have won. First of all, he had Rabbi Elazar on his side, and his prayers every single day, they were saving them. With Rabbi Elazar's prayers, and if he would have remained righteous and fought the righteous battle, maybe they could have won. But because of his sins, or his paranoia, and because he killed his uncle, now he doesn't have their prayers anymore. And because of his gruesome act of murder of his own people, it's his sins that are his downfall and causes him and his people to lose the war. So he is killed. Now, by the way, there's a question here. And as you know, once he's killed, and once the war is over, like I said earlier, it brought about the worst of times, the amount of death and no more Jews in Israel anymore, the amount of slaves that were taken for the Romans. Many terrible things happened after the destruction of Beitar. So the point I'm making is that things became much worse after this chance and this downfall of Bar-Kochba, much worse than before he fought. And then Hadrian becomes even more angry and more vicious in his attack on the Jewish people and on Israel. In fact, the Talmud describes that the time after the destruction of Beitar, during that period of time until the end of Hadrian's life, was such a severely terrible time for the Jewish people. It was called Shas Hashmad. It was called a time where there was a concerted effort to completely destroy and eradicate Jews and Judaism forever. Before, Hadrian had some patience for the Jews, as long as they're going to live based on what he wants them to do. Now he's lost all patience for them. In fact, this is the time that we know that Hadrian brings thousands of slaves, and he says we have to eradicate every single memory and trace of the Jewish people ever in Israel. And so it takes thousands of slaves to raise the earth of the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount used to be the highest mountain in Jerusalem, because that's where the temple should be built, on the highest mountain. But if you look today, there are mountains in Jerusalem much higher than the Temple Mount. So apparently Hadrian was the one that took thousands of slaves to raise it approximately, we're told, 1,000 feet lower than its original height, to make it a lower mountain so no one will ever know. There'll be no memory that here's a place where, where the temple once stood. Then he's the emperor, he starts to draw maps, all the maps of all the schools and the textbooks and online, any map you could find. He erased Israel from the map. Just like today, you can find maps without Israel mentioned on the map. So he also erased Israel. Instead, he calls it Syria Palestina. That's his new name for Israel. So Aelia Capitolina is Jerusalem, the Roman province of Jerusalem, and Syria Palestina is Israel. Israel has been destroyed off the map. Some say it was Hadrian, some say it was somebody else, but there's a concerted effort here to destroy the Jewish people. So it brought about a very, very difficult time. Now, how did Bar-Kochba die? This is a matter of great disagreement. So before we continue text 2, let's go to text 4 for a moment. Text 4 is a very short passage in the Talmud in Sanhedrin, and the only place in the Talmud where there's a clear discussion about the validity of Bar-Kochba. or not. So the Talmud says, Bar-Kochba ruled for 2.5 years. So during the siege for 3 years around Beitar, and Bar-Kochba fought back, he managed to have a stronghold of somewhat of a peaceful, decent life for the Jewish people, which, if you can remember, since the destruction of the temple 60 years earlier, the Jews had never enjoyed some level of sovereignty, of independence in Israel, because the Romans were in charge. For 2.5, 3 years, Bar-Kochba managed to succeed in some of the smaller battles and holding off the Romans, and so the Jews enjoy some independent Jewish life in Israel. He approaches the sages and he says, I am Mashiach. I mean, that's what Rebbe Kiva told them, right? They said, now, these are the people that don't trust him. So they said, let's test you out. With regard to the Mashiach, we are told that Mashiach is able to smell and judge. Mashiach is very gifted, and he has a very deep, intuitive sense or a spiritual sense. Normally, when you judge a person, a case, a law, a trial, you have the facts from this person, the facts from that person, and you work with the information you have, and you try to come up with a result, and maybe the information is a little flawed, or maybe your logic is a little flawed. You try to arrive at a just verdict, but you don't always succeed. Mashiach doesn't work that way. Mashiach is a highly intuitive, spiritual person who works with higher powers and higher forces. He can smell, and he knows who's right and who's wrong, and what's real and what's not. So let's test you out. Do you have that talent? Do you have that skill to be able to smell and judge? And once they saw that he was not able to smell and judge, which means he failed the test. You're not the Mashiach. So the Gemara says, they killed him. Who killed him? Who's they that killed him? The Talmud doesn't say. On the one hand, if you read the sentence, it's the sages who were testing him, can he smell and judge or not? And once he was unable to, the sages, they killed him. Or maybe they somebody else. And this is a big question. Who ends up killing Bar-Kochba? How and why does he die? And also, let's say the sages were right. He wasn't the Mashiach. He didn't pass the test. You get the death penalty for that? I mean, why is he liable for death? So why he might be liable for death, not suggesting that the sages killed him, but why he was deserving of death could be, the commentaries explain, because he was becoming a false prophet. And the Torah says a person who stands up and proclaims himself as a prophet, but they're a false prophet, and they mislead the people, and they misinterpret the word of God, or they make up the word of God, they're very dangerous people. In general, anyone who ever tells you that they know the word of God and God spoke to them last night, stay far away, almost all the time. That's a false prophet, and the punishment of a false prophet is a death penalty. So the sages definitely believed he was deserving of death. The question is if they killed him or not. Most commentaries understand that it wasn't the sages of the Jews that killed him. And when it says they killed him, it probably refers to the Romans, which is going to be, which we'll find in the source, going back to source 2, it probably was the Romans or the Kuthites. It was in the story in Beitar. They killed everybody and they killed him also. What it might mean that the sages killed him means the sages let him be killed, meaning the sages abandoned him. And they sort of left him very vulnerable. They were no longer supporting him anymore and leaving him on his own because they had no mercy for him because they realized he's a fraud, according to them. They let him be killed. So, let's go back into the final source and finish source number 2. We learned that Bar-Kochba was put to death. Third last paragraph of source number 2. His head was brought to Hadrian, who asked, who killed him? A Kuthite came forward and said, I did. So it wasn't the Jews or the sages, it was me, a Roman or a Kuthite. Hadrian said, go and bring his body. He went and brought it, and they found a snake curled around his neck. So the Kuthite killed him, the snake killed him. It's not clear exactly who killed him. He was taking credit for it, but I don't know if he's telling the truth. But he was killed, and Hadrian declared, had his God not killed him, who would have been able to do so? Which is a very powerful expression. You know what Hadrian's saying? Hadrian's saying that the truth is, we would never have been able to win against Bar-Kochba. Bar-Kochba was supposed to win, right? It's such a complicated story because at the end of the day, we're going to have to judge Bar-Kochba, right? And today we're going to try to figure out. It's so complicated because, first of all, we learned earlier that were Bar-Kochba not to have killed his uncle Rabbi Elazar, and he would have had Rabbi Elazar praying, he wouldn't have had a downfall. He would have won. So it's his own sins that causes his death. And then who manages to kill him? The only person that can kill him is God. Or God can allow him to be killed. Meaning if God would not have been angry with him, if he would have merited God's blessings and protection, Hadrian himself said that we, the Roman army, with our hundreds of thousands of soldiers and artillery, would never have been able to destroy Bar-Kochba. He was the most mighty general ever to live. And he could have saved the Jewish people and fended off the Romans and brought redemption back to the Jewish people. But on account of his sins, God killed him. And thank God, says Hadrian, because now we're able to destroy all of Beitar and the 585,000 people which they killed. 80,000 Romans entered Beitar. They slaughtered the men, women, and children until, we learned this before, but here's a different description, until blood flowed from the doorways and the sewers. Horses sank up to their nostrils with blood, and rivers of blood lifted up rocks weighing approximately 700 pounds. That's how deep the rivers of blood were, and flowed into the sea, where its stain was noticeable for a distance of 4 mil, approximately 2.5 miles. Not pretty. Final thing, Hadrian had a large vineyard, 18 mil by 18 mil, that's 11.5 miles by 11.5 miles. It's a huge property. The distance between Tiberias and Sipari, and he surrounded it with a wall made from the bodies of those slain in Beitar. He did not allow for the people to be buried, rather they made up the walls to his vineyard. He also ordered that they not be brought to burial. So he continues to persecute them even after they've been killed already. Why would he want to have walls of dead bodies? Maybe there was a way to prevent them from decomposing, because it wouldn't have been a very pretty or nice smelling vineyard. Maybe it would have fended off all the insects destroying the vineyard. There is a sequel to this story, to the celebration of Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av is the 15th of the month of Av, which we celebrate, and the Talmud says it's a very great celebration that day. And what is the great celebration? There are many reasons, many great things that happened on that day. And one of the things were that many years later, the bodies of hundreds of thousands of people, the Hadrian did not allow to be buried from Beitar, were given permission to be buried. And it was a very special time that finally they could be brought to rest. So let's summarize and let's try to figure out a conclusion, a verdict about Beitar, about Bar-Kochba. Was Bar-Kochba a good guy, the hero, or the villain? We find that our sages have very mixed views about this. It's very complicated. It's complicated because on the one hand, the pacifists had a point. And we ended up in a much worse place than we were before our revolt. At least we had some freedoms and some life in Israel. Now we have nothing. And now Israel was razed to the ground even worse. On the other hand, Bar-Kochba was a very powerful person. He probably could have won the war. The Talmud says he could have won, were it not to be for his failures later of killing his uncle and upsetting God. So there is a famous dispute in the 11th, 12th century between the Rambam, Moses Maimonides, and the Raavad, Rabbi Avram ben David, who always argued against the Rambam. The Raavad says that Bar-Kochba was the villain in the story, and he calls him Mashiach Sheker, a false messiah. Like there have been many false messiahs, and especially at times of great confusion and great persecution and a lot of pain, those times for sure, and many other similar times in history, it's a very opportune time for somebody to step up and play with the minds of the people. Everyone is desperate for some hope. Everyone's desperate that something as good is going to happen. We're waiting for God's hand of salvation. And if a person steps up and can play with the people and say, I'm the guy, come, now's the time, follow me, and we can make it happen. Like there's been other such people in Jewish history, It is a terrible story. The ending is never good. Of course, it's always a bad ending. Lots of lives and lots of hopes and lots of dreams get shattered. And it's a great desecration of God's name. Well, according to the Raavad, Bar-Kochba was the same thing. A Mashiach Sheker, a false Messiah, he goes down the list with many other false Messiahs in Jewish history, and he's not somebody to be celebrated at all. The Rambam Maimonides has a different view, and I want to read what the Rambam comments. The Rambam, in his last couple chapters of his work, talks about the laws of Mashiach and redemption. And the Rambam is describing how to discern who is a Mashiach. Now, something important to mention here, there's a comment here from Gary, like the Nazis who use Jewish bodies for all sorts of disgusting things. Yes, Gary, so the Nazis use Jewish bodies for science experiments and all other kinds of similar things. I mean, here he used the bodies to wall off his vineyard. Good point. So the Rambam is trying to tell us, how do we discern who is Mashiach, right? Imagine somebody steps up and says, I am the Mashiach. Right? Do you believe him or not? How are we to know? Now, you should know a very important foundation of Jewish thought and faith, and that is, the Rambam says, we await for every single day for Mashiach's coming. That means that any single day, Mashiach might come today. The ultimate Redeemer might come today. In fact, we have to await that he will come today. And for him to be able to come today, that means that there is a person alive today who can be the Mashiach. In every generation, there's a person who could be the potential Mashiach, and if God taps his shoulder, right, that person himself might be alive right now, might not even know about it. But at some point when God says we're ready, God will tap his shoulder, give him his mission, and he'll be the Mashiach. So it could happen any day, and it could be anybody. It's not me. At least I haven't been told by God. I hope it's not me. I hope it's somebody much more righteous than me. So the Rambam says as follows. One should not presume that the Messianic king must work miracles and wonders, bring about new phenomena in the world, resurrect the dead, or perform other similar deeds. If somebody says, I'm the Mashiach, there's no point in testing him. Do a miracle, resurrect the dead. No. That's not true. That's not a criteria to be a Mashiach. How do I know this, says the Rambam? I have proof. Proof can be brought from the fact that Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest sages of history, was one of the supporters of Bar-Kochba and would describe him as the Messianic king. Rabbi Akiva said that Bar-Kochba is Mashiach. He and all now the Rambam says something that we don't find in other sources. He and all the sages of his generation considered him to be the Messianic king until he was killed because of his sins. Listen to his words. First of all, he tells us it wasn't just Rabbi Akiva, but it was all the sages of the generation considered him to be Mashiach. We didn't know this before. But now we know many more people thought he was Mashiach. And he could have been the Mashiach. However, he was killed because of his sins. Once he was killed, they realized that he wasn't the Mashiach. The sages did not ask him for any signs or wonders, which means that's not a way to test a Mashiach. The Rambam is saying as follows. There is a status. A person can do certain things that a Mashiach is expected to do. For example, gather all the people of Israel back to Israel, all the Jews go back to Israel, and strengthen Torah and mitzvot among the Jewish community. And there are many such things that Mashiach is supposed to do. And when a person will do a lot of these things, we don't yet know that they are Mashiach, but we know they are what's called cheskas Mashiach, which means they can be presumed to be Mashiach. They are a potential Mashiach. They're already doing things which a Mashiach, a Redeemer, will do. And then, if and when the time is right, we'll find out if they're Mashiach Vada, if they're a certain Mashiach or they're not. But even if it could be that a person does a lot of the activities Mashiach is expected to do, and is strengthening Torah mitzvot around the whole world, and is bringing in all the Jewish people together, and closest to God. And there may be a cheskas Mashiach, there may be a potential Mashiach. It might not in the end happen, meaning God might not tap them in the end to make them the certain Mashiach. But that doesn't turn them into a false Mashiach. They're not a false Mashiach. They're not somebody bad. They were a potential Mashiach, but for some reason, that time, that generation, that era was not ready or deserving for Mashiach to come. So they could have been the Mashiach, but they weren't the Mashiach in the end. And now we go into the next generation and find somebody else. That doesn't make them into a bad person. Maybe it's more a reflection about the generation. Or maybe it's a reflection of them. Like the Rambam says, in the end, because of his sins, he passed away. The Rambam says that Bar-Kochba was not a villain. He really could have been the Mashiach. He really was a potential Mashiach, as Rabbi Akiva and others and maybe everyone else thought. And if everything would have gone right with him, it could have happened. And would have spared us 1900 years of painful exile. However, it didn't happen in the end. And he died because of his sins. And we know, by the way, we have in his letters, even during the revolt and the time in Beitar, for the few years that he was fighting the war, it's clear that he was very concerned about the Jewish life and the observance of mitzvot of the army and of the Jewish people. And he kept reminding them about Shabbat, reminding them about kosher. And it's clear in his letters, he was a very devout person. Not only was he a mighty warrior, but he was a devout Jew. He was a learned, he was a sage, he was a holy Jew. But he wasn't perfect, and he sinned. So that is a bit of a summary and a glimpse into this very difficult time of Jewish history and a very complicated person of Bar-Kochba. And what's the takeaway? First of all, the takeaway is that now it's time for Mashiach to come. We've been in this exile for nearly 2,000 years. Thank God, in 1948, we were able to reclaim sovereignty in our Jewish state. But unfortunately, too many, thousands of precious souls have been lost and killed. It's been a very bloody experience. It's been a very costly experience. In 1948, if you would have told the founders of the state, those who fought the battles then, those who made the negotiations, that in 2021 we're going to be commemorating Yom HaZikaron, thousands of soldiers and others who have perished because of war and terror, nobody would have ever imagined. So it's been a very costly experiment. However, tonight we pay tribute. Tonight we thank them. And there's no question about it that having Israel today, and a strong Israel, and a vibrant Israel, and a well-fortified Israel with the army that it has and the kind of a lifestyle that it has, is a blessing for Israel, is a blessing for the Jewish people, is a blessing for the entire region over there, is a blessing for the whole world, is a blessing for America. America is better off because of a strong Israel. And I hope and wish that American leaders understand that. It's not important to Jews, it's important to the whole world. That we continue to support Israel. Pray for Israel. And whoever it is in our generation, may God bring us our Mashiach, our righteous Redeemer. May prove to be not just a potential candidate, but a true candidate to end all war and end all sorrow, and bring in all the spread out people from all over the world, the Jews, and bring us back to Israel. And with the rebuilding of the third and final temple, may be without war and without loss. May it happen in a blessed way. May there be peace and security among Israel and all the nations of the world. As the prophet says, may all the weapons be turned into plowshares. No more need for weapons and Israel or whoever it is blowing up the nuclear facilities in Iran. Enough of that. Time for nations to get along. Time for everybody to realize the blessing of Israel, the blessing of the Jewish people, the importance of connecting with God and bringing peace to the world. May it happen. Speedily in our days. God bless you. Thank you for joining us, and a good night.